That time that I called a 6-year-old fat right to his face.
Dun dun dun.
This is a true story. I would like to point out that I was also 6 years old. This was in the first grade, way, way back in the 80s. Since I don't want to fully dox this person, his first name was Brandon, but we're going to call his last name Hoggenstein. Brandon Hoggenstein. Now, Brandon and I were in the same grade, in the same class. The teacher's name was Ms. Sliney. And I remember the day it happened, we were waiting in the cafeteria on the lunch line as they were putting the food out. And I was not friends with Brandon. I was not enemies with him. He was just one of those kids who was in my class. And we were both standing there, and we were kind of looking at each other. And he had this look on his face like,
What?
So I said, "You're fat." And I still briefly remember the look on his face. He had like seen a ghost. He was like shocked. He was like, "Oh!" And he immediately left the line. And I didn't think too much of it. I was like, here, off he goes. And a few moments later, he shows up again. And this time he's got Ms. Sliney with him. So he ran off and he tattled. Mrs. Sliney looked at me and she said, "Peep Street," which is obviously not my actual name. "Did you call Brandon fat?" And I said, "Yes." And then she had that same look on her face like, "Oh, Peep Street, that is not how we talk to our friends." Of course, back then, when you're 6 years old, the teacher's always trying to tell you that everyone's your friend. Looking back on it now, as an adult, I'm like, hey, the kid wasn't my friend at all. I barely knew him. So she said to me, "Peep Street, you apologize to Brandon and say you're sorry." So I said,
"Brandon, I'm sorry, you're fat."
and Miss Sliney said, "No, that's not what I mean. You apologize sincerely. You bend down, you kiss his belly."
You apologize.
"I'm sorry?"
And then after that, she walked off, he walked off, but I still remember that look on his face again, and this time it was more kind of a gloating face. He's like, "That's right, you can't say anything bad about me." And that was it. Now I realize now as an adult, Ms. Sliney had a great opportunity to kind of shape two young minds in a very positive direction instead of just one. And let me explain. When Brandon came back with Miss Sliney, they were both aligned so that it was obvious they were both against me and I was in the wrong. Now obviously, if you know anything about 6-year-olds, they have a tendency to just kind of blurt things out. They just say things. So to me, calling a fat kid fat was kind of like calling the sky blue. Like, I didn't see anything wrong with it. But they came back to me, and they were standing side by side, and Brandon was there already. It was almost like he was on the podium, with his award acceptance speech all ready to go. And I could tell at that point that the reckoning for Peep Street was about to come. The reality is, I think Miss Sliney could have done a much better service to both of us if instead of having Brandon on her side, she should have had the two of us standing next to each other and her being in front of us, first saying, "Peep Street, that was very rude and inconsiderate what you said to Brandon. Those kinds of comments can hurt people's feelings and you shouldn't do it." I'd like to think that at 6 years old, I would have got that message and said, "Okay, I'm sorry." And then she could have turned to Brandon and said, "Brandon, you could stand to lose a few." And also, no one likes a snitch. And that should have been the end of it. And then we both could have gone on our ways, hopefully learning a very valuable lesson about that interaction. Now, even back then, in the 80s, there's a good chance that Brandon would have gone home at that point and told his mother what had happened, and then maybe the mom is calling the school or maybe even showing up and complaining about the teacher at that point. It would be kind of strange to complain about, one little kid being quote unquote mean to another. Like kids that age, they don't think, they just react to things. They just do things. But I could totally see how a mom even back then would be like, how dare you say that about my child, my perfect child. And obviously in this day and age, that's the norm. Like you can't criticize a kid at all. So if you're a teacher and you criticize a kid, you'll be out of a job. Sometimes I wonder now in my evil adult mind if when Miss Sliney and Brandon had had come back for the Peep Street reckoning, and she said to me, "Peep Street, did you call Brandon fat?" What if I had said, "Oh no. No, Brandon's my best friend. But I did see those kids over there. They were pointing and laughing at him the whole time. Maybe it was them." And imagine if she bought it. And then she just took Brandon to go confront those other kids. And then as she was like hauling Brandon away to confront them, like he was looking back at me like, "Oh, no, it was you. Oh." And then what if those other kids then, with these new false allegations that were lobbied against them, they were so shocked they didn't even know how to answer. So they were just guilty by their own silence. And then after school, they hunted down Brandon and just gave him a good what for. I feel like that's the scenario where everyone would have won. And by everyone, I mean Peep Street. And I really don't understand this society where if you say anything that insults someone else, that you're just going to have all these authority figures coming after you. I was an Asian kid going to school all through the 80s in a predominantly white society. And I got called all kinds of things, and it never dawned on me that I should run to a teacher and say, "That kid asked me if my dad was Bruce Lee. Those kids always ask me if I know karate." I remember one time I came home, I was kind of upset, and I said, "Mom, the kids at school call me Slant Eyes." And her response was, "Well, what do you care?" Which now as an adult, I almost feel like she was saying, "Well, you kind of have slanty eyes." Cry me a river. What do you want me to do about it? Mom. I only have one other memory of Brandon Hagenstein from my youth. I think he was only in that same school as me for maybe another year. So his family might have moved away after that first year of school together. But my second and final memory of him was from Thanksgiving. And back then, they would actually dress up kids as, I guess, settlers and Indians. And they used to actually call them Indians. And I remember, they'd put like the face paint on you, and you'd wear like, those Indian style like feather hats. Like I remember making those. It was like a really fun thing that we did. And Christopher Columbus they used to teach us about him like he was Indiana Jones, and he was just this amazing adventurer who, came to America. He met all the Native Americans, and they invented Thanksgiving together. That's just how it was back then. But anyways, we were doing that sort of celebration. We were kind of dressed up in our what would now be incredibly offensive Native American attire. The school would have kind of a Thanksgiving-themed lunch at the cafeteria. And so I remember having that, and then when we returned back to the classroom, Brandon Hagenstein proceeded to vomit up all of his special Thanksgiving Day cafeteria food. It was all over his desk. It was all over the floor. I remember it being like the puke was like kind of this weird like purple color. I still remember that. And I remember the smell of it. Well, I mean, when does vomit ever smell good? Never, right? But I remember that smell kind of filled the classroom. And so Brandon was sent to the nurse's office, and then his parents were called, and his mother showed up to get him. And they had come back to the classroom to get his things. And I saw his mother. I was like, oh, the deep-fried, batter-dipped chicken dumpling doesn't fall far from the all-you-can-eat buffet. Brandon's mom was a pretty large woman, so it wasn't difficult to figure out how he ended up the way that he did. So how does this story end? Why am I telling it? Well, we now live in a world where we just have these soft, weak-minded individuals who get offended by everything. It's so prevalent now, especially on social media. As I mentioned earlier in my recollection, that this could have been avoided if Miss Sliney had taken a different approach to meting out her punishment of me, I suppose. And so I kind of hope that whatever happened to Brandon Hagenstein, maybe if more people, called him out on his obesity, that he would have eventually got to the point where he said, I'm going to make some changes in my life. I'm going to try to get healthier. I'm tired of being overweight. I'm tired of people making fun of me. And I can't always run to an adult and have them come running back and chastising whoever insulted me. That's just not a realistic way to live your life. The fact of the matter is, What I did was insensitive, yes. I'm sure it hurt his feelings, but it was the truth. And the truth can hurt sometimes. And obesity is a very serious problem, and it needs to be addressed. We really shouldn't strive to live in a society where fat acceptance is a good thing, because it's not. And so the final thing that I'll add to this story is wherever Brandon Hagenstein ended up, I hope that he's in great shape right now, that he lost the weight, that he goes to the gym on a regular basis, that he's eating healthy, and maybe he remembers that first kid that said that mean comment to him in the lunch line all those years ago. And he's thinking, oh, if I ever see that kid again, I'm going to shake his hand. It started the momentum in my life to make some changes. And then I'm going to punch him in the face.